it's on the back cover because nobody reads that anyway, but it's always really important. Many authors have traveled and explored the out of doors, both in life and then in their books, proving themselves stalwart, audacious, even heroic. Andrew Farkas is not among them. He is brave enough to admit that the outdoors isn't for him. Instead, in these essays, Farkas reports on his bold explorations of a very different territory, the inn of doors, the waiting rooms, kitchens, malls, bars, theaters, roadside motel rooms, and other places that feature temperature control, protection from rampaging predators, and a higher degree of comfort that can be found outside. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce my new friend and the great indoorsman himself, Andrew Farkas.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start off by reading a little bit. This is from the essay, The Great Indoorsman. This section is called From a Philosophy of the Indoors, Where I Lived and What I Lived For. I went to the indoors because, like Henry David Thoreau, I wished to live deliberately. I wished to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. But, well, I found I wasn't exactly cut out for that sort of deal. See, it didn't really agree with me, so to speak, sounding rather romantic and bombastic, like it'd take a hardier constitution than I have, the right hombre for the role being several orders of magnitude manlier than me, and require a whole lot more patience, the Spartan life leading to, like, watching ants fight it out and what have you. So I figured the unsucked marrow of life, sure, it'd be just fine encased in the bones of whatever larger being this metaphor is referring to, while in the meantime, I'd master resignation, not in a broken and defeated way, not in a fatalistic way, but more in the Falstaffian way of being gloriously resigned to the pleasures and experiences which suit me, those being the modulated wantonness and controlled chaos of the inn of doors, where we're not so concerned with reducing life to its lowest terms, because that sounds like roughing it, and I mean, are you kidding me? Not a chance. So instead, here we let the burgeoning human world cut a fairly broad swath through our psyches, never shaving so close as to be intimidating, though. Here we admire the beautiful on purpose, knowing it'll never drive us out of our comfort zones and into a corner, forcing us to act as the out-of-doors most certainly would at some point. And here we finally put to rout the idea that there's something wrong with living inside, with its temperature control and comfortable furniture, and lack of rampaging predators or slithering sacks of neurotoxin or airborne stinging pests. For most folks, it appears to me, think of the indoors not as a habitat constructed lovingly for them, but as some sort of necessary evil that, truth be told, given our collective druthers, whoever stole them in the first damn place, we'd happily escape from, we'd get away from it all, as they say, but really, to where at would we go? I'm thinking it'd just be another space indoors.
Grab that microphone and bring it over here before I kick you out of here, because you made me 40% of the writer I thought I was when I walked in here.
That was my goal.
And let me tell you, I don't know that I've ever heard anyone who can write a run-on sentence like you can. That's at least a half a page. So, Strunken might be damned.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I love the long sentences.
So, okay, first of all, and I think you've already answered all the questions I had, but let's go anyway. Why indoors?
For one thing, I feel like it has changed some, but when I was an English major, we were, still learning the old canon, and at different times you run into different movements that are very much about the outdoors. And so like the Romantics were very much about the outdoors, the Transcendentalists, and then some of like the later realists and stuff like that. They were really, really into the outdoors, and I was like, well, that's great, but I like it inside. I don't see a literature for that. And so I decided that I wanted to make that. The other thing is that I've always been a fiction writer until I wrote this book, and one of the things that I got to thinking about was how much, fiction ends up coloring our sense of reality. And so I started thinking about all of the different stories we tell ourselves about the indoors. So, for instance, one of the essays is called Pool Hall Legend. And in that one, I talk about the fact that it seems like even now, if somebody goes to a pool hall, they will at some point start talking about hustlers, even though I can't imagine anybody is making any money off of being a hustler anymore. Maybe once upon a time, certainly, but not anymore. And yet that story continues to come up. And so I felt like a lot of the different spaces that I was writing about had that, like some fictional story that was attached to it. And so I wanted to use nonfiction in order to show how fiction, colors what it is that we see of as real.
One of the things I really like about this is, to the bigger picture, whether it's about the inn of doors or whatever, is that you take something, when you talk about Thoreau and all that stuff, you take something that we all believe, that we've all been told we're supposed to believe, or that is supposed to be right, and you turn it on its ear. And I think that alone makes it humorous. But what does it mean to you because we met each other, full disclosure, about a month ago on a Zoom call, and we talked a little bit today. But a lot of people think they are funny. Humor is intentional for you.
Oh, absolutely.
So talk a little bit about that and how you craft humor.
First, I got into it because when I was starting to write, I started in newspaper writing, actually, and there was a time period where I was a humor columnist. And so, like, when I was in high school, probably the writer who was the biggest influence on me was Dave Barry. And so I read his, like, in the Akron Beacon Journal when I was growing up. He was in there every Sunday, I think it was. And I read him, I read his books, and I wanted to be a writer like that. And so that's sort of where it came from. I think also there was just, like, a lot of humor in my family, and it was a lot of, like, frequently, like, the dry humor. And so I had, I was constantly surrounded by that, like, people telling these offhanded jokes where, like, you would walk by them and then you would suddenly realize that what they said was really funny, and you didn't always know it immediately. And so that was another thing. But for me, like, I really do think that humor is an extraordinarily important part of art that often gets denigrated. And I even feel, I know, I've read a lot of writers who are funny, and then, like, they're told, oh, you're really funny, and they're like, oh, well, I wasn't trying to be funny, as if, like, that there's something wrong with that. And so, and obviously, like, I'm very much into, like, kind of high-minded humor, so, like, the lowest common denominator kind of humor. Like, there are a lot of people who are really into that, so that's not what I do, but I'm very drawn to it. I remember I saw, like, actually, so this is painting, I saw a Roy Lichtenstein exhibit, and I had never thought of him as funny. And I saw this exhibit, and suddenly I saw that he had done all of these parody paintings of, like, very famous paintings. And right after that, I was immediately a huge Lichtenstein fan. And so, like, he's the one who does, like, a lot of, dots in his painting, and one is called Magnifying Glass, and it's just a field of dots with a magnifying glass over it, and those dots are bigger. And that's it. And at one point, I wanted the big red herring. I wanted that to be the cover, and the publisher said, "Well, if you're paying for it," and I was like, "Okay, but that's not the cover." But yeah, so consequently, like, I'm, like, not everything I write is funny, but I'm frequently striving to find ways to view things in a humorous way.
And it's interesting. There's an essay called An Essay About Nothing, which, if there are any Seinfeld fans out here, you know that the show is about nothing. And I think that's a really good, to me anyway, that's a really great example of taking a really dry approach to something that is, so basically what it is Andy writes a set of dialogue and a narrative that goes between the Seinfeld episode where they're all waiting for the table at the Chinese restaurant, mixes it in with parts of the play Waiting for Godot, and then somehow folds in this relationship with your friend Steve, and just how you would totally get under his skin all the time. And you have to read it because it's brilliant in the way he goes back and forth between these three, and it makes perfect sense. It's hilariously funny, and yet you go, I'm not sure what I'm reading. But
so that was very much influenced by David Markson, and I sat down and I was like, I want to write a David Markson piece.
So talk a little bit about David Markson and how.
So David Markson, like his books, This Is Not a Novel and The Last Novel, those two books are like, the entire books are just like snippets of all of these different quotes, and then there's also a kind of like story that's unfolding. And I was like, I really want to do that, but I want to specifically do it with Seinfeld and with Samuel Beckett. And so I ended up blending those together, and I thought about doing that before I even started telling the story about me and my friend Steve. I was like, I really feel like this nothingness fits in with classrooms, because I feel like so much happens in classrooms, but the spaces themselves are nothing. And so that was what I started thinking about, and then I started thinking about the absurdity of the fact that, like, the entire story with Steve is the fact that I found out when we were undergrads that he and I had the same shirt, and as soon as I found that out and found out that Steve was annoyed by that, I wore that shirt every single time we had class together. And not only that, but so like sometimes he would be wearing it, but then he more or less stopped wearing it at one point, but I kept wearing it, and he would get annoyed, and I would still say, hey Steve, same shirt, even though we weren't wearing the same shirt. But yeah, so so that's, I guess the other thing is that also ends up like showing my absurdist like worldview, which the absurdist worldview is definitely in Seinfeld, and then absolutely that's, to me, Seinfeld came from Waiting for Godot and other things by Samuel Beckett. So
no, that was a beautiful piece, and when you all buy the book, you will read that and you will enjoy it. Not everything you write, though, is humorous. And talk a little bit about going between writing humor and writing serious stuff. What's the value of it within a piece like, The Great Indoorsman, or just what is the value? Or why do you want to go back and forth?
I guess so. Like, we're used to like the comic relief, and I almost think in my writing it's the opposite. It's like the serious relief. Because I try to write so much that is funny, but I understand that at a certain point that will just either become overwhelming or just like just reach a point where things stop being funny because of the fact that you constantly have this barrage of things where obviously I'm trying to be funny. And so I feel like it's the serious relief instead of the comic relief. And so in The Great Indoorsman, for instance, I ended up writing an essay about a mall in Akron that now is dead. When I was writing the essay, it was almost dead, but now it is dead. And I was very surprised when I went through it one time with my dad that I was actually affected by the fact that it was dying, because like part of it was my dad worked at the power plant for that mall and then was downsized. And so when he was downsized, I hated that place so much. I was like, the hell with the mall. Who cares about malls? And so I stopped caring about it. I didn't go very much. I didn't think about it. But one day, like, I was sitting there with a friend of mine across the street, and I saw that it's like crumbling apart, and I was affected, and I did not understand why. So what I ended up doing was I ended up combining my thoughts on Chapel Hill Mall with the kind of like confusion found in the old movie Last Year at Marienbad, which is a kind of obsession for me, because that's a movie where things happen and you're not entirely certain how they're all coming together, because the main character says that he and this woman met the previous year, and they said that if they met the following year, they would go off together. And she says she's never seen him before. And so he keeps trying to convince her, and after a while, like, you start taking sides, even though both of them become completely unreliable. And yet you are affected by the stories that they're telling, even though you're not certain that either one of the stories is true. And so I ended up using that there. And so I would say that's one thing that I was trying to do in this book, is finding ways to bring people in. So it's like, you might say, I don't care about this mall in Akron, but you might be interested in, like art cinema, and so then that can bring you in.
Let's have another little palate cleanser then. Would you like to read some more?
Okay, sure.
We need a roadie.
We'll do it.
All right, so this, all of these pieces are from the essay, The Great Indoorsman. And so this one is an excerpt from a guide to the indoors shopping. The gallery furniture cafeteria was almost empty. A ray of sunlight slanting through a gigantic window fell yellow on tables that needed bussing, recently occupied by a horde of children and their spunky parents. It was a remarkably lonesome moment. Raucous music roared from the 450-inch telescreen. Uncalled, a memory floated into my mind of a plush family room where me and my friends celebrate our New Year's Eve tradition, bad movie night, everyone bringing one entertainingly lousy film, everyone joyously mocking. The trip to gallery furniture had been taken in the same vein, the store even mimicking one particular flick quite well, John Carpenter's They Live. Since pasted everywhere were slogans in black letters on white paper, espousing capitalistic success via hard work and determination, espousing obnoxious forms of patriotism, espousing eye-rolling and groan-inducing Christian morality. But unlike in the film, these slogans were not subliminal, not hidden by alien technology. No, they were unabashedly on display, including, inexplicably, "What does not kill me makes me stronger" from Friedrich Nietzsche. Although completely out of place on the walls, Nietzsche would have fit in with us as we lampoon the gallery furniture coat of arms, which contained both a silhouette of the state of Texas and also the word Texas inside the silhouette to further establish the silhouette of Texas was indeed Texas and not some imposter state. The fact that this furniture store for some reason had shrines to Elvis and Princess Diana, the fact that this furniture store had a tennis machine with court and a medieval castle playground, the fact that it not only had a theater marquee, coming soon, chairs, and a Vegas-style sign, but was also as disorienting to walk through as any casino. The fact that the 450-inch TV obviously wasn't enough, so televisions were mounted absolutely everywhere, many of which were playing gallery furniture commercials, inexorably demanding how delighted you'd be if you came to gallery furniture, no mention of what if you're already on site, begging the question, is there a higher plane gallery furniture, a mystical gallery furniture? Is the vision of gallery furniture that I see your vision's greatest enemy? The fact that cameras cover every square inch of this emporium, apparently fully embracing any dystopian vision you might have for the place. The fact that if you made a purchase, you received a red, white, and blue basketball, completely covered with gallery furniture logos, so that you'd have an unimpeded view of that logo no matter how you held the ball. The fact that international flags pervaded, making us think Mattress Mac believes each of those countries is located in his store, which it makes sense seeing as how his book, Always Think Big, might indicate the world's population will soon live under one banner, gallery furnitures. The fact that this wasn't really a furniture store at all, but a theme park dedicated to the outrageous, absurd, and insufferable spirit of this state, typified by Lone Star Beer's ad slogan, the national beer of Texas. But the lesson of bad movie night is that whereas lampooning makes some of the films barely endurable, others come alive, and like their poorly constructed monsters, suck you inside, make you thankful they are the way they are, no matter how ludicrous, because you get to interact with them. You get to jeer at them, though your irony, your vitriol can never raise you above this travesty so you can look down on it, can never truly get you outside of the thing itself. But why would the Great Indoorsman want to be outside? What has the outside ever done for him? The Great Indoorsman gazed up at the gargantuan telescreen where gallery furniture owner Jim McIngville was speaking rapidly, bopping and juking, about to leap from the two-dimensional world into the store. 40 minutes it had taken to understand the fuck. I mean, really, 40 minutes. Oh, cruel, needless misunderstanding. Oh, stubborn, self-willed exile from the Texas-sized breast. 2 Coca-Cola brand-scented tears trickled down the sides of his nose. But it was all right. Everything was all right. The struggle was finished. As the commercials relentlessly foretold, he was delighted, so extremely delighted. There are no small emotions here, intensely, terrifyingly delighted. Because he loved gallery furniture. And he knew Mattress Mac was going to save him money. Today.
So many things to dissect here. But let's talk a little bit about observation, because as much as humor is based on observation, creative nonfiction, which is what this is based on observation. And sometimes taking something as mundane and everyday as what you just did and making it entertaining is truly an art and a talent and a gift. So talk a little bit about observation and how your power of observation changes over time, because I think what probably happens is you're observing all the time.
Right. I think part of it might just be that, one of the things that I do in that is I talk about the tradition my friends and I have of bad movie night, and we've been doing that for over 20 years. And so I think that makes it, and so when I walk into places and I go different places, that I end up seeing things that a lot of times people would just ignore. Or I end up like talking to people and they'll say something and I will latch on to it, whereas other people, like my mom's husband, he read a bunch of the essays that I wrote, and he's like, you pay a lot of attention to people that I would have forgotten, like, before I walked past them. And so one of the essays that I wrote, which is about playing poker, it's called Time Stands Still When You're Having Fun, which is a quote from a Sam Shepard play. But I was playing poker in Billings, and this guy, like, at the poker table suddenly said, our son died. And the guy we replaced him with was eaten by a bear. He just got in the cage with the bear, and the bear ate him. And everyone at the table like went silent, and they all started asking questions, but I was the only one who said, the guy you replaced your son with? and later on, like, I was still thinking about that, and everyone else at the table was done. They were not thinking about it anymore. And so and then like that just stuck with me. Like, I didn't write that down for a really long time. And for the longest time, I was like, how am I going to use this? And I feel like the fact that it's those sorts of things stick with me. I pick up on like certain things and I'm able to make fun of it. But part of it is that I had that influence, like friends of mine who see things in movies. And then they can make fun of them because they're paying attention. So.
Nice. So let's talk then too about, we're talking creative nonfiction. Everybody thinks that these stories are, a lot of times people think these are factual tip to tip, right?
Right.
But these are your stories or stories or things you've observed based on your best recollection. So talk a little bit about where do you draw that line of creative license and embellishing characters, doing setups, sometimes for the purposes of entertainment, but also sometimes for the purposes of driving home the point.
So for me, the biggest thing is that I said when I'm writing creative nonfiction, if I start making something up, I will tell the reader. And so there are different ways to do that. So sometimes it's that I couldn't possibly remember everything, and so I say it could be something like this. And so people understand that I'm not, like deviously trying to fool them or something like that. But instead, it's just that I don't have a perfect memory, and there's no way to find out. Like, there's no real record of this. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is that there are times where I will make things up in order to give something a structure. But again, I tell people when I'm doing that. Or I make it so painfully obvious that no one would, be like, oh, obviously that happened. At one point, in the essay that's about Tuscaloosa called Somewhere Better Than This Place, I talk about a commercial being filmed and I'm in it. Obviously, I'm not in any commercials, but yeah. But it fits in with the structure of the piece, and so I feel like a lot of times that's something that I end up doing when I'm writing creative nonfiction, because a lot of times there isn't a lot of structure. Like that has been my argument with people who are very much into realism. I say, it seems to me like if you were actually writing realism, your characters would spend a lot of times doing nothing. And that nothing at the same time would be something, even if it's just like sitting on the couch and staring at the ceiling, because that's still something and not absolutely nothing. And yet you don't see that very often, or if you do, it's being used for a very specific purpose. And so I say it seems to me that realism has a whole lot that is manufactured in it. And I feel like you have to manufacture, like at least a little bit in order to give essay structure. And the other thing is that I would also go to movies and stories and novels that have influenced me, and I would use them to structure things. So, for instance, using Seinfeld and Waiting for Godot.
Talk a little bit too about. I can't remember the essay. I apologize.
That's okay.
You actually tell the reader at some point, you may decide not to keep reading here, but basically saying, but if you do, it's not at your own risk. It's kind of like it's your own fault. And then later on, you revisit it again and say, if you're still reading, you revisit that. Why do you do something like that?
So that essay is called Affront or Affront. And in that one, I'm specifically playing off of H.P. Lovecraft. And so the thing that I'm doing there is tapping into that horror idea. But I'm doing it in order to play with the idea of a front business. And so a phony business that is just there to launder money. And yet, I find that frequently when people are like, oh, that place has got to be a front, probably it isn't. My dad is really big into the it's got to be a front sort of thing with various places. And so consequently, I thought about it and I started to think about, because it's sort of a bookstore, it was a comic book store, but I was thinking about it and it's like, I was thinking it's a bookstore where you have no idea what's going on inside. And so I was like, okay, that seems like a Lovecraftian story. And so I started putting it together like that. But the other thing is that I think that there's this, I definitely have an interest in playing with the idea that I'm supposed to be absolutely focused in pleasing the reader, and sometimes I think it's more interesting when a writer doesn't necessarily do that, and instead it's almost like an antagonistic relationship. And the thing that I immediately think of right there is think about hanging out with your friends. When you do that, you don't just hang out and say, man, I love you, man. And that, no, people are making fun of each other all the time. And then, yeah, at some point we'll be nice to each other, but there's plenty of like jokes and fooling around and stuff. And I like to establish that sort of thing too. And so another one is, I'm going to push you away and see what you do.
It's kind of the creative nonfiction way of creating tension.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm going to consult my book for a second.
Okay.
So just talk among yourselves.
Well, thank you everybody for coming out, by the way. Thank you very much. Yes, I had 3 canceled flights.
I'm not done yet. I'm not done yet.
Oh, I know.
Okay.
I'm
sit there.
I'm just, yeah.
Still life with alarm clocks.
Okay.
Okay, so I'd like to read the beginning of that, unless you'd like to read the beginning of it, because I think it's possibly the most identifiable piece, because I think it's something that we've all gone through, and I love the way you craft it.
Well, I think you should read the opening and.
Okay. Now I have to find it. Stand by. You don't know the page number?
I don't have numbers memorized.
Stand by. No, okay. All right, let me do this. Okay. So this is the beginning of Still Life with Alarm Clocks. If you close your eyes, you can see the motel room. You can. It's right there. Right there in front of you. It's yours. At least for the night. You can lie down and, I'm sure in the moment with the highway hypnosis, the road seems to go on forever. For Andrew Everett Farkas, who's called Andy, who thinks of himself as Andy. And so, for Andy, with a bad case of white line fever, the road appears to go on forever. But soon enough, oh soon enough, he'll exit at long last the highway. Yes, it can be done. He'll exit the highway, he'll pay at the desk, having made no reservations, meaning even now Andy doesn't know this room you can see, is to be his. He'll limp through the door, take a shower, collapse on the bed, watch some TV, and then, yes, he'll go to sleep. Later, he'll be awakened by the alarm clock at between 3 and 4 a.m. Though he didn't set the alarm clock. So, if you've ever stayed in a hotel room, if you've ever done any traveling of any sort, you've probably been awakened at some ungodly hour by whoever set the alarm for whatever their early morning flight was the day before, right? I just love that because as soon as I read that, I'm like, that's happened a million times. And obviously it goes on and it gets better after that, but I just thought I really enjoyed that piece, especially because it is 100% identifiable.
Oh, thank you very much. That's and so with that piece, I tried to construct what I think happened, which ranges from the possible to the completely unlikely. So that I constructed that. But the other thing is that it's surprising to me because at first I didn't know anybody else who had that happen to them. And then after I wrote the essay, suddenly I met a lot of people who were like, yeah, I've had that happen to me. But yeah, so the putting that one together was weird because that's that one I definitely used a lot of different influences. And part of the reason for using all of the different influences was the fact that I was like, how am I going to make a story about being accidentally woken up by an alarm clock interested? and so one section is sounds very much like The Trial by Kafka. One sounds like the old Time Life books about aliens and stuff like that. It sounds like the commercials from the 1980s. And then there are other influences. I use the whole paranoia thing that people think they were being watched in motel rooms and stuff like that. And I talk about how if somebody was watching you, it would be the dullest possible thing in the world for most of the time.
Well, people didn't come here to listen to me read. Would you like to do one more?
Sure.
Piece?
Yep. read the end of the Great Indoorsman, and it's called A Fragment of the Indorsiad, or the Epic of the Great Indoorsman, the Prophecy of the Great Indoorsman. In the future, at some point, you'll ask me to go camping with you. Do not despair. It has happened before. It will happen again. When you do, when you extend to me this invitation, I will be polite. I will listen to your pitch. I will encourage you to relive your favorite memories of bucolic surroundings, of life in the out of doors. Ultimately, you'll talk about getting away, as if there were anything to escape. About returning to our roots, though I was born inside. About the majesty of various mountains, about the terrifying sublimity of the jungle, about the serenity of the forest, about the brutal beauty of the desert, about the ponderous expanse of the plains, about pristine lakes, about vast oceans, about rolling rivers, about nature. In a compromise, you'll perhaps even offer the rambunctious joy of mainstream campsites where each lot has electrical outlets, where shower houses and bathrooms are to be found, where stores and even restaurants are nearby, where carousers sit around fires underneath the stars, drink beer from the can, and soak it all in. Definition of it and explanation as to why it must be absorbed, unspecified, likely unspecifiable. When I appear impassive, stoical, you will say with maximum confusion, with maximum frustration, for goodness sakes, it's the outdoors. From the comfort of a temperature-controlled room, I will inform you that I have been to the out of doors. It's not for me. Dazed, despondent, defeated, you'll depart headed in the direction of whatever sort of nature you prefer. Will that be the end? It will not. For while you are hemmed in by that flora, while you are surrounded by that fauna, you'll get an idea. Nature of the idea, epiphanic, delusional. If only you will think I could formulate the right words, the proper phrases, the precise sentences, then I could convince his indorsiness to venture forth into nature. Will you succeed this time? The only reason I'm able to bring myself to tell you that you will not is because you won't believe me. For upon returning from your expedition, you'll be rejuvenated, restored, revitalized. You will have been made whole by the open air, so when you step foot back into civilization, you won't do so as a bowed and broken subject of the modern world, but as an explorer, a conqueror, the one being who can bend the will of anyone, no matter how resolute. And so, completely confident, absolutely assured, replete with resolve, in the name of nature, you will go forth and seek out the lair of the Great Indoorsman. You'll know where to find me.
Nicely done, Andy. I have two more things. First of all, what is your favorite piece in this book?
Oh man, I think probably it might be the last piece called Noir Girl. It kind of goes back and forth between that one and an essay about nothing. But Noir Girl, I feel like all of the various things that I was doing in this book, they all sort of collapse into that one essay. So I feel like it's funny and also purposefully not funny in parts, and I use all of these different influences, and then there are other times where I move away from them, and so I kind of feel like everything really, comes together in that particular piece.
How do you approach your writing objectively? Because you are you edit all the way through. Like you don't have other people edit your stuff. Is it easy for you to take a step back and look at it objectively? I mean, I can only speak from my own experience. I'll go through and I'll read something and I'm like, that's pretty good, and the next time I'll edit or read something that I've written and I'll go, that's trash. And by the time a book is ready to be written, I hate every single word of it.
Well, so for me, I just keep working on a piece until it almost stops seeming like something I wrote and becomes something that I want to read. And so that's what I would say that I end up doing, is like, and there have even been times, so like particularly with my very first book, I realized at one point that I had gotten old enough and that book had been out long enough that I had forgotten things that were in it. And so I went back and I read through some of the stories, and there were a couple of times where I was like, "Hey, that's a really good line," and then I was like, "Oh well, yeah, okay, I read it." And so I feel like that's the thing is that for me the early part of writing is extraordinarily difficult, and the more I work on something, then the more I get into it. And like one of the things that I do is I'm constantly reading my stuff out loud, and when it sounds like, when I know that it's done when I go through it, and I don't feel like there's anything I have to change. Like I like the sound of everything, and so that sort of sound is really, really important to me. Although at the same time, I do have other people read my work as I'm going through too. Like I'm not one of those people who's like, oh no, you can't look at it until it's completely done. So like the Carl Peterson, who I dedicated this book to, he's from Minneapolis originally, and he read each one of the essays as I was writing them. And sometimes he would just say, well, I don't know, I think this one's done. Like I don't have anything that I can. And there were other times where he was like, I don't think this part is working. And so I would look at it again. To me, it is most useful when I think something is done and somebody I respect is like, yeah, I don't think that part is done. And then, it takes me a little while, but then, like I can go back to it.
One of the things that just really impresses me and that I'm entertained by and amazed by is your ability to go from total brain dump stream of consciousness to concise, tight, well thought out phrases to dialogue and to go from serious to humor. And sometimes even in the second segment that you read from the Great Indoorsman, you set us up with a very serious tone, and then you went funny, and then it went kind of poignant and serious again. And to be able to go back and forth, I think is really a cool journey for a reader.
Yeah, and that's even though I have no musical ability whatsoever, like I can't play any instrument at all. It's strange that I feel like rhythm is a really important part of my writing. Although, like, I can't tell you, like musical notation kind of rhythm because I don't know it. But at the same time, that is important to me, and sometimes people have been surprised that I really don't know that much about music because of the fact that it sort of seems like that's something that's influencing me.
Nice. Does anybody have any questions for Andy?
In your opinion, what's the key to writing good humor?
So one of the things that I did is I read a whole lot of humor, and I would, as I read it, I would start to pull apart how it was working. And so I think that's one thing is that, so it's kind of the thing that writers often say is to, in order to become a better writer, read a whole lot more. And so I think that one of the things to do is to read a lot of writers who are funny. And so I have to say that one era of literature that influenced me a lot is postmodernism, because of the fact that a lot of the people who were writing that were also really funny. Like Thomas Pynchon, yeah, he's really serious sometimes, but he's hilarious other times. And Samuel Beckett was the same thing. So that's one thing is to read a lot of humor. I think the other thing is that you have to, maybe more so than other kinds of writing, you really do have to test it out on people. And so a lot of times you're going to say something and you're like, oh man, I think this is hilarious. And then you say it and then nobody thinks it's funny at all. And then you're like, oh, that didn't really work. And so I think that's another thing is just seeing how humor works with people. So like you said, like the various ways that I do like setups, it's not like plot setups, it's more like, kind of like joke setups. And like the other thing is that I watched, especially when I was a kid, I watched a lot of stand-up comedians. And so stand-up comedians were a big influence on me. And I have to say the one who was the biggest one, even though I don't know that I always write like him, is Stephen Wright. Stephen Wright is a huge influence. But I would say that's the thing is that maybe even more so than like straight up dramatic writing is like you really have to wade into humor, and then you also have to be willing to fail because humor a lot like even one of the most amazing things was Seinfeld made that documentary called Comedian, and it was him completely stripping his stand-up routine down and making a new one. And so you see him early on, and he's not funny because he's trying something different, and it didn't work. And so that's the thing is that you have to test these things out. I hear that like the Marx Brothers used to do that. So, like they would do their jokes in vaudeville, and the ones that would work, they would use in the movies.
Anybody else?
No, go ahead,
Good
David.
hand first.
So I'm wondering, I can imagine that people will say, oh my gosh, you've got such great stories. I don't have any good stories. Like what might be a response to that?
So I mean, like I said, the one story is really about me wearing the same shirt as my friend Steve. So like, to be honest, when I first thought of that, I was like, I think that's funny, and Steve thinks that's funny. I guess if I write this essay, there will be two people who like it. And so I think that's, so the thing that I would say is a lot, and then the other one is like I'm writing about a decaying mall. Well, you can go onto YouTube and watch any number of decaying mall videos. And people are talking about them, and sometimes the stuff they say, you know, like they sound interesting. Other times, not so much. And so I think it's a matter of taking what you do have and finding ways to structure it. And so, like I said, I used a lot of my influences. So the one about gallery furniture is very obvious. Like I thought it was obvious to use 1984, and so I thought that was funny. So I used it. As the structuring device for that, because otherwise it's me and my friend Jim went to a furniture store, hooray, you know. And so I think that's with at least my approach to creative nonfiction was to constantly find something else. Like you have the story, and then you have something else that can bring people in.
Sir, you want?
Yeah, two questions. Where are you originally from?
I'm from Akron, Ohio.
Oh, okay, I kind of figured that, but just in case. If you're born somewhere else, you're transplanted there.
Yeah.
And then number two, humor, I find is something that is kind of you got that good timing.
Yeah.
Just like you were talking about with me, like as a musician, or like I find it easy to like have fun with people when I'm with somebody, but writing down your train of thought. What am I trying to say here? Like, so like as you're reading, your cadence and your inflection of your voice, is that how you write? Like, is that how you're thinking and you write it down like that, or is that you writing something down and then you're like performing it like that?
So I would say that I feel like I frequently end up writing the way that I talk. Maybe not exactly,
Yeah.
and so consequently, I would say that since the way it sounds is so important to me, that what I will do is I will write things down, and then I will just keep spinning through them, and I will keep reading them out loud. And I won't lie, I found out later on that not everybody does that, and I was surprised because I thought everybody did. So that's part of it is that I write it down, and so I have what I've written down, and then I read it out loud, and then I probably won't like the way it sounds, and so then I do it again, and then I keep like looking for the thing that is going to like pull the reader through. And I mean, like I feel like there's probably more of a plot to each one of these essays than I normally work with, because to be honest, a lot of times I'm not as interested in plots. Like, I know everybody else loves it, but to me, I'm frequently more interested in the way things sound and like surprising, like ideas in a piece and stuff like that. But I would say that even though it ultimately ends up sounding like me, I don't think it does at first. Like, I think I write something down and it's, okay, that doesn't work, and then I just keep going back through it. So that's what I tell my students. My students think frequently that revision is something that their junior high school teachers invented to torture them. But actually, I tell them it's really important and that I actually do it way more now than I even did in junior high when they were teaching me what it was. And so I just feel like you have to constantly spin through and look for it. The other thing is that I've read a lot of plays, and I think that's another thing is that whenever you read plays, you're really listening to how people are going to deliver those lines. Because if you don't hear that, then it doesn't work. So.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
You're the Great Indoorsman with capital letters, but your last 2 stops have been Kansas and Montana.
Right.
So
Yeah.
has that fed any of it, or interactions with students, or just those surroundings? Has that fueled what you've written?
Yeah, because I mean, particularly in those places, but other places too, people frequently, talk, very, like wide-eyed and, like excited about the outdoors in a way that I mean, I don't, begrudge anybody that. I'm just saying that, yeah, there are plenty of people who like the outdoors, but there are those of us who like the indoors. So, for instance, in Montana, when I first moved there, I was talking to a guy who asked me where I moved there from, and I said Chicago, and he said, "I bet you're glad to be out of there." And I said, "No." and he was very obviously about to sell me on Montana after I said that, and I said, "I don't like the outdoors." And he said, "We don't have anything for you." But I would say that that might help me to a certain extent. Because of the fact that I'm surrounded by people who are saying, "I love the outdoors," and they think everybody's going to say that, even if maybe they don't love the outdoors that much, they still might say it, whereas I'm like, "That's great, I don't." And I feel like that works out.
Well, and I think that too. Oh, yes,
Oh,
sir.
I was going to say along those lines, just the title of your book, the great outdoors is the phrase that you commonly hear, and everyone has their own imagery of how majestic that be, rivers or lakes or oceans or whatever. Well, how would you describe the great indoors?
So for me, the great indoors is like one of the things is that I talk about anytime people like say, "Look at like the majesty of the outdoors," and I'm like, imagine running from the bears who live in the outdoors. And so that's the thing that I constantly think of. And so what I think of with the indoors is I think of this place that I'm very, very comfortable in, and that is frequently in weird ways, like even, overwhelming in the way that the outdoors is for other people, but like overwhelming and interesting because of the fact that you wonder why it ended up looking like that, or why people ended up making it that way, or why people ended up thinking about it in that way. And so, and then like, I guess people's fantasies about it, or like anti-fantasies. I think that's what my bowling alley one is like, is that I talk about how a bowling alley, what you think of as a bowling alley is kind of like, the Kung Fu master and like the old, like Kung Fu movies who like tells you, "Oh, there's nothing for you here, get out of here." Whereas the people who are actually good at bowling have to relentlessly do the same thing over and over and over again perfectly. And then there are the people who are like, it's not a sport. And it's like, can you do that? You can't? No. But so that's the thing is that I feel like the indoors is also this place that is very, intriguing and awe-inspiring, which is the opening line of the book. But I guess I feel like people don't think about it that much. And that was also why I specifically didn't pick places that are famous. So it's not, I'm sure there are plenty of people who've written about the Louvre. So if I did that, that would just be like, yeah, all right, okay, well, we got that. So I wrote about a bunch of places that people normally think of as grungy or not particularly good, and talked about how great they were.
Very nice. Well, I think we've come to our natural end. I will tell you again, it's honest, it's authentic, it's identifiable, and it's damn funny. So I would encourage you all to pick up a copy of The Great Indoorsman on your way out if you can, and please stop and talk to Andy some more. I know he's had a long day. I think he still has to have dinner, but I'm pretty sure he'll hang around for a little bit. So please give a big round of applause for Andy.